for fair balance and trying to find a quote from Donald Trump about the Latin American female presidents, I didn't find any. Maybe he doesn't know there were Latin American female presidents. So let me start with this first round. We'll have a short chance to hear each of the panelists, and then we'll open again for questions from the audience. Let me start with Dr. Garrard. So many of the women that have served or have run for office in Latin America had a man in their lives, a husband or a father that proceeded in the same position of power. Others like Bachelet and Dilma came to power after co-opting more traditional masculine spaces. Bachelet as head of Ministry of Defense, and as a Chilean, I was very proud to see her bossing the generals in Chile. It was a great moment. And Dilma was in the guerrilla, again, dictatorship. So do you think we're finally reaching a point in which we can break from these traditional patterns of having what we call these traditional masculine credentials?
Well, I wish I could say we were, but I don't think we are at all. If you look at going back a little bit further, women presidents in Latin America, the first one was Violeta Chamorro, who became president because her husband was assassinated. If you look a little to the future, the most likely person to be the next president of Guatemala is Zuri Rios Montt, who uses that last name even though it's just, it's her father's last name. And so we haven't broken away from that pattern. Within Central America, again, not to be too focused on that, but they've just approved for Daniel Ortega's partner. They never have actually gotten married, but for her to be vice president, he's very ill, and so the assumption is that she will assume power when he dies. And so Cristina Hernandez de Kirchner also is a widow. And Hillary Clinton is married to Bill Clinton. So let's not forget that even in our case, we haven't broken out of that pattern. And it is true that Bachelet and Dilma came up through these masculine representations. Yeah, I think it's a good way to put it. And not just masculine, but tough guys. The only one who's the outlier in that is Laura Chinchilla, who comes from a prominent Costa Rican family that's been involved in politics since the beginning of time. But she is the exception and probably the worst president, unfortunately, that we've spoken about here. So I don't think we're anywhere close to breaking out of that. On the other hand, when you look at quotas and representation, there are many countries in Latin America that have 50-50 representation in the Asambleas Nacionales and sometimes in the cabinets. And what that promises is an avenue by which women can become involved in politics on their own accord early in their lives and develop, follow a path, their own career path that will lead them to the presidency. So I think that's a reason for optimism on that front. And I would like to see that here too. We have much lower representation in our own Congress in the U.S. than any Latin American country in terms of female representation. So
I was just going to add that when we were doing the PRP, one of the big elements in our analysis was looking at who the mentors of these women had been. Kind of a little bit to your point about the fathers and the husbands. And it was, of course, terribly interesting to look at it because, of course, for Dilma it was Lula, for Bachelet it was President Lagos, for Chinchilla it was Oscar Arias, who was really her mentor. But with Cristina, it's a different story because Nestor and Cristina met as students, and they were activists as students, and so they grew up politically together, kind of mentoring each other, really. It always, and that's where I was going to draw the parallel, where it's more of a political partnership and mutual mentoring, which is very interesting. And people, kind of with Cristina, it infuriates me that, kind of it's, Nestor's wife and Nestor's widow, and people forget that she had a pretty distinguished political career of her own. I mean, she was a very powerful senator when he became president. So it's not, what they tend to think, yeah, let me mentor you and let me tutor. That's right. That's right.
So, can I just add one thing? It also seems to me that the issue here is the political system itself, that the party structures in each country have a lot to do with how successful women are.
Right.
And you look at the way in which, how long it has taken for a woman to rise to the level of being nominated in this country. I mean, it's not that there haven't been women in the political process before. We've had women as vice presidents and so on, and Shirley Chisholm, I might point out, was also ran for the presidency. It's the structure of the nominating system and the whole party system that keeps women out. And that's a huge challenge, I think. It's probably the biggest challenge, I think, that women face is how to overcome a political system that is so well embedded and so controlled at every stage that it's hard to insert yourself into that.
Sexism hides under code words. And in the case of our presidential election, we have heard those code words to undermine Hillary. Which ones are the ones come to your mind now? Any code words about she doesn't look presidential, she lacks stamina, temperamental, etc. So in your case, through your research, what were the codes word you heard most in Latin America, and what were the most particular sexy challenges that impressed you the most you were facing?
I can't repeat them because they'll send me to wash my mouth. But no, there definitely is, kind of a lot of sexism. What we have done in our analysis more is kind of do quite a bit of content analysis in the media and see, kind of how they're portrayed in the media. We did, for example. An interesting piece of the research was on looking at political cartoons and how these women are represented. So I think it is very subtle in those ways. But again, kind of here right now it just kind of I keep thinking, kind of this is just surreal what we're living through right now, because there's no, there's no attempt to kind of to veil it, to at least disguise it a little bit, kind of as has traditionally been the case. It's just totally all out there.
It seems to me we don't really have the script for what a woman president is like. We don't quite, we don't really understand yet. I remember purely by hearing about it, because I certainly wouldn't have lived through it, when women went back to work, they went to work and they would dress like men. They'd wear the little tie, and now we know that that's not something that you have to do. But I know it's very striking, and I saw it in the photographs you had up there, that I've seen Laura Chinchilla. Every time I've ever seen her in real life, she was president then, and she wore this white suit. And I noticed that Christina does too. Jilma's in a white outfit. I know Violeta Chamorro also used to wear this white radiant thing, but it looks like a wedding suit. And do we not, I mean, you cannot help but make that the celebratory sort of performance of a woman at the peak of her life, the pinnacle of her life, wears white. And that seems very strange to me. But I also think that this, certainly up here, and also I guess in Latin America, I certainly haven't followed it as closely as you have, Victoria, particularly the language, it's barely even been coded. You know,
Yeah,
it's sort of
yeah.
right out there. I don't, and pardon the language on this, but I don't know what the male equivalent of bitch is. But that certainly has come up many times. I don't even know. We don't have a male version of that, even though we don't have a gendered language in English. And yet the idea that the things that are strong in a man, forceful will, forceful personality, decisiveness, a loud voice, a big looming presence, women don't naturally have. And so what does a script for a woman look like? We don't know. And when you look at what's happened to poor President Obama, you know, I remember when he was elected, I know a lot of you do, and we thought it was sort of the end of race in American society. Could we have been more wrong? That this implicit racism, this pernicious racism, that white people had the luxury of thinking had largely dissipated. I think people who aren't white didn't have that luxury to think that. We realized that absolutely not, and just the presence of this man of color in power brought out the absolute worst in our society. And we're living with the consequences today. And so, to me, the effect of the election of a woman president, I've certainly seen it in Latin America. People, you know, it brings out the kind of gender bias and sexism that you encountered. So that doesn't surprise me, because people can allow themselves to think they're one way when they really are not.
Right.
They cannot bear it.
You know, I'm going to send you, Paloma, maybe you could send it out to, or find a way to disseminate it. But in my class, the Hattie right now, we read an article that was on in the Atlantic 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's exactly what you're talking about. What's going to be the fallout in terms of the anti-gender lash that we can expect if Hillary wins, where it's going to be, you know, kind of exactly what you're talking about. You see this, we saw with President Obama, this bubbling up, you know, kind of racism. And so what now the conversation is, you know, kind of, we're going to see the same thing, you know, kind of this bubbling up of this horrendous sexism when we have a female president.
But I also think, I mean, I'm not trying to put a silver lining here, because I do think that that the Trump tape in particular, if you've seen the response from women who have finally spoken out, not just the women who were groped by Trump. I can't believe I'm talking about a presidential candidate like that. I'm just trying to think it, and it just boggles my mind. I mean, I'm thinking of prime ministers of England and what would happen to them.
Jimmy Savile.
Well, we have Jimmy Savile. Yeah, but he was a BBC. He was an entertainer. He was a BBC entertainer. I mean, we have a lot of sleazebags out there. I'm not surprised by that. And some of them are British. I know that too. But the fact that people and women are now saying it's enough. That is enough. I'm calling him out. I'm calling everybody out. I have a young friend who, the daughter of close friends of mine, and she makes a lot of videos that she puts up on YouTube. It's called Living Through the Lens. I'm going to plug it right now because it's a wonderful little comedy video. She apparently was being harassed by a young man in the subway station in New York. And this is, I think, what the younger generation does. So I do think we have to take their position into account. And she just turned around and said, "No!" And he just backed right off and turned and walked. So I think, you know, there's a way of dealing with this. I mean, maybe we have to treat those kinds of men like dogs and make them, you know, sit and behave. But I think it's empowered a lot of women to speak out. And so maybe if there is a backlash from some against Hillary, maybe that will, there'll be a larger voice against that than we've had in the past.
We do need the silver lining. I have many questions, but I'm sure you have many more, so let's just open here for the public questions.
Hi, I'm a Latin American, and international relations study, but I'm also South American. And my question would be, do you think that we would see more female presidents in Central and South America in the future? And if so, will they be more into the left or into the right? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I mean, I certainly hope so. You know, kind of it's hard to predict because I think what Sue was saying about you know, kind of political parties, you know, kind of working the political parties is that's the unpredictable thing. You know, because political parties do function as gatekeepers. And so, it's, a lot is going to depend on, you know, kind of where the country starts to lean. You know, is it going to be to the left, to the right, and then, you know, kind of what women start to bubble up. I mean, Ginny was talking about Guatemala. In all likelihood, is going to be a female president. You know, so I think you know, it's a very good question, and I certainly hope so that we that having had you know, the experience of these four women more or less at the same time, it will have an effect. Let me answer your question also by going back to your question, Gloria, about what surprised me the most. Just as I was very unpleasantly surprised with the level of sexism, I was also very that people by and large tend to think, you know, kind of it's a female candidate. You know, kind of I'm going to vote for her because she's a woman, or I'll never vote for a woman, or whatever. It was just, you know, whoever the best candidate is. So that was a pleasant surprise. You know, that I think in terms of electing women, they're not thinking so much in terms of is it a he or a she, is who is the best candidate. So we just need to hope that, you know, kind of we have some wonderful female candidates.
Addressing when you mentioned social media content, have you found that there's any great, I guess, maybe bipartisan or fair social media out there that talks about both parties? Because this has become so outrageous, and I'm a Hillary supporter, but I went on Fox News to read Fox News because I wanted to read what's on the other side of what's being portrayed and so forth. So have you found something that's a little more equal about, I guess, a voice for both?
Yeah, I think the case where it was clearer that there was, you know, kind of that there was a 50-50 was in the case of Cristina in Argentina, because her main, you know, the main opposition to the right is a media conglomerate, and they went to the races, you know, kind of you know, kind of every day the paper was covered in, you know, criticisms and attacks and the most horrific caricatures, and you know, and it's you know, kind of a really important media conglomerate in Argentina. But that, I think that's the one. You know, you're absolutely right, and you did the right thing. You know, kind of what is the opposition saying? You know, we shouldn't be just, you know, we should also be paying attention to that. But I think what I learned was, you know, learning to look at, you know, choose the two opposing points of view. You know, so that your analysis is more balanced and it's not, you know, just kind of one-sided.
So I enjoyed the presentation very much, and I was going to say, with regard to your findings about the absence of sort of a gender policy agenda by these female presidents, I wonder how much this has to do with the fact that all of these presidents emerged from really mainstream traditional political parties. And if we look at, for example, with ethnic minorities, racial minorities, I do notice a difference from when they're emerging from ethnic parties and when they're emerging from traditional mainstream parties. And my sense is that those presidents who have emerged from ethnic movements, like LLILAS, for example, embrace a much more ethnic policy agenda. And so my assumption would be the same thing would be true for women. That is, if a female president emerged from a women's movement or a women's party, you're not more likely to embrace the gender policy agenda. I mean, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, we didn't think about it in those terms, but as I was listening to you, I was thinking, you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it goes to the point about, you know, kind of these women, you know, they're governing very complex societies. I think it's the same thing. You know, kind of they're mainstream politicians that are coming through mainstream parties. And once they get there, you know, kind of they become the president that happens to be a woman rather than, but I think you're right, you know, and I think that's, to prove your point, I think this emphasis on social policy, I mean, in all of Latin America, social policy dominates any other type of policy agenda. No question about it, male or female. So I think, you know, because it's the mainstream thing to do, you know, with especially like with the conditional cash transfer programs and all of that do tend to favor women, because, you know, kind of the money is by and large given to the woman in the house. But I think you're absolutely right, that they are, you know, mainstream politicians coming through mainstream parties.
Carla?
Hi, I'm Carla from the Business Center here, LLILAS. So I guess I have a comment and maybe two questions, if I'm not pushing too hard. The first is, of course, I'm from Brazil, and it was very